Hey there, all my rotation 411 astrology initiates. I like to say it twice because sometimes it takes a moment to kick on for the playback. So I'll say it again. Hey there, all my rotation 411 initiates or rotation information initiates, because that's what 411 stands for, at least in the United States. Let me know if that's universal to the rest of the world. I'm not sure. I'll just go ahead and share this new tarot deck real quick that I got. So my cousin went to this really cool bookstore when he was visiting for Thanksgiving, and he got me a gift card, and then he's like, they have tarot decks there. So I went and checked them all out. Of course, the first one I gravitated to was the Thoth deck. I'm very interested in it. I'm not a follower of Aleister Crowley, but I am interested in it because all things are related, so I take the best out of everything. And I didn't even realize my man's a Libra, and he's always showing up as the King of Swords. So I first went to the nice Thoth deck, and the lady's like, "Good job going for the most expensive deck that we have." It was $450, and then they had like a $28 one that's more common that I've seen before. But this one is called Tarot of a Moon Garden, and I thought it was pretty cool. And I didn't even realize till I got home that the King of Swords had popped up a couple times when I was looking at the decks, because that's just what he does. And I hadn't realized until I got home. I'm like, I picked the one where you were directly on the bottom. So that's pretty cool. This is the Ace of Wands. It's a beautiful deck. I love the border on it, but it does take up a lot of real estate, is what the guy at the store said. He's like, I'm like, I love the illustrations in the border, but the border takes up a lot of, but I just thought, I have so many different decks, and I pretty much have to use the 78 card deck for my readings. I mean, I do like to tap into the Oracle decks as just a little bit of an extra message, but to do my readings, I didn't even see the Emperor yet. He's pretty cool. That's Aries. That's me. And then the Queen of Cups keeps popping up, so I guess I'm in a love bubble. And the Ten of Pentacles as well. It's been showing up a lot, so I'm like, that's good omen. And then he's like, the guy at the store was talking to me. He's like, I don't like to go too far from the traditional decks, but we have the Two of Wands here, and the guy's got, the world in his hand, so it still has some of the traditional symbolism. But this one does have a unicorn in it. It's sort of a whimsical deck. And I'm not really a fairy and unicorn kind of girl. This color scheme is definitely me, my Libra rising, but I just feel like this was just so unique. And we just watched the film Legend like a week or two ago, which was Tom Cruise, and it's about unicorns. So I was like, okay, I'm in that vibe. The Seven of Cups is pretty cool too. It's like you're down here mingling and you want to get to the castle. It's an interesting take on the Seven of Cups. So yeah, it's a pretty cool deck. I can't wait to use it more. Maybe it'll motivate me to do some general tarot readings for you guys. I haven't had a client yet to use it, and I don't read for myself a whole lot anymore. When I first started, I did a lot, but let's go ahead and jump into, if you're just now joining us, we're covering The Outer Planets and Their Cycles by Liz Green. It's a book study, and it has 7 lectures in it, and then it has a chapter on the age of Aquarius, the age of Pisces, and I think we're supposed to go over several birth charts, but I feel like we've been doing that as we go. So we've gone over Carl Jung's birth chart, Freud's birth chart, Hitler's birth chart, anyways, so we're going to go ahead and pick up where we left off on lecture 4. And if you want to check out the first 3 lectures and the intro to the book, this book is $150 on Amazon. I think the paperback might be like around $80. You can check out the playlist is the first link in the description below, and I'll pin it in the comments in the playback if you're watching this later on. Oh, 1 second. Okay. All right, so I don't know exactly. Okay, so when we left off the other day with lecture 4, part 1, we were going into, she was talking about Neptune. She was talking about the signs that have traditional rulers, but they adopted the newer planets like Neptune and Pluto. Yes. Is it Ellie or Eli? Hi, Nicole. Okay, so she was talking about those planets. Now I'm competing with the house phone. Neptune, Pluto, and so now she's going into the houses that those planets rule. So we're going to start with, let's begin with the 8th house. That's Pluto's house, and she already kind of covered Scorpio being ruled by Pluto, but traditionally Mars. So if you want to hear more about that, again, I would check out lecture 4 part 1. It'll be the bottom of the playlist. Hi, Ahmed. We are reading the outer planets and their cycles, so we're going to jump into it. It can get a little monotonous, so I know a lot of you come in and out, but we will stop and pause, and I have a lot of conjecture to add to it. So anyways, let's begin with the 8th house. The signs in the houses form a cycle of development, a circle of experience that ends with a new beginning. The definitions traditionally given for the first 7 houses are usually pretty clear and workable, because up to that point, the cycle of development concerns the individual himself with his own values, attitudes, family, pleasures, habits, and so on. A person is born at the ascendant, and the first house is his identity. Then he begins, or for some of you, you might know the ascendant as the rising sign, the ascendant. That's what rules your whole chart. So whatever planet rules that sign is the planet that rules your chart. And wherever that planet is deposited is very important. So for example, I know I'm already going on a tangent, but my ascendant is Libra. It's Venus ruled. Venus lands in my 6th house in Pisces, and Venus is exalted in Pisces. So what in the 6th house rules work. So my identity is Venus, relationships, Libra, right? The Venus of Libra, because Venus rules Taurus as well, I believe is more relationship, because that's the 7th house, Libra's house. And so landing in my 6th house of work, what is my work, you guys? I deal in relationships with astrology, which is very Pisces ruled 12th house stuff. Okay. So anyways, it took me a long time to come into it, but it was always there, you know? So anyways, if you ever want a personal reading from me, it's rotation411.com. I have tons of different kinds of readings on there, packages, live readings we can do. So check that out. If you kind of just look over it, you'll figure it out pretty quick. So, pretty clear. And okay. So then he begins to develop his resources in the 2nd house and learns to interact with the environment in the 3rd. He becomes aware of his roots and his need of others in the 4th, and finds his capacity to create in the 5th. In the 6th, he refines and perfects the skills of living. And in the 7th, he becomes aware of others as objective outer things that are separate from him and must be accommodated. Then we come to the 8th house. How do we get from the encounter with the others to insurance policies and legacies? I think we must stay with the idea of a cycle. Something happens as a result of an individual's encounter with other people. He will not be the same anymore if this encounter has been genuine, because another person will always force you to discover things about yourself you didn't know before. You find that there are deep undercurrents, drives, even a fate which is at work in any deep relationship, which reveals an entire unseen and unknown world. This is the unconscious, which has a good deal more to say about what we are in relationships than the ego does. And I believe it might start at the 7th. It's the 7th or the 8th where at the top of the northern hemisphere of the chart starts. It was 1 through 6, so it's the 7th where it starts, but it's still the precipice of the northern hemisphere, the more public life. So as you're coming into meeting others in your public life, that's just like the beginning of that. You go into the 8th house, now you're dealing with secrets of others and what you want to leave behind for others and what others have left behind for you. Okay, so discover things about yourself you didn't know before. You find that there are undercurrents, drives, even a fate which is at work in any deep relationship, which reveals an entire unseen and unknown world. That's very much the 8th house. This is the unconscious. So the encounter with the other person in the 7th house leads to the encounter with the other in oneself in the 8th. And the frightening thing about that other is that it is not just one's own. It's all the silt and accumulation of mother and father and masculine and feminine going back for eons. So some could say this is where you'll find your, generational curses and traumas. And it's the underworld of the psyche, which is the place to which Persephone gets abducted when Hades or Pluto grabs her and takes her in his black chariot into the halls of the dead. I touch on that Persephone and Hades story a lot when I'm talking about Pluto. I feel like even Saturn, even though it's Hades in that story, I feel like Saturn can kind of do that to people too. Like Saturn square Venus can be sort of a Persephone Hades type of mythology. Anyways, okay. All of Libra's ideas about human interchange, which she's kind of referring back to the 7th house, tend to fall to pieces when confronted with the scorpionic side of life, which I think is nicely described by Freud in his work. The 8th house is a battleground, a place of collision. The individual must submit to something other, whether that other is his own repressed darkness or his fate. Out of this collision, there comes the realization that something other than the ego runs the show. Let me just see what you guys are saying in here. Hi, Savitri. I hope I'm saying your name right. I got a penguin. Hi, Wenny. Hi, Caleb. Yes, I do remember you. And I wanted to also say sorry to Joe Rodriguez. He was in here last week with me when we were doing the first part of lecture 4. And I said I'd be back that afternoon. So if any of you are waiting for me to come back, I wasn't feeling so great. So I didn't end up making it back on. But here we are now. So hopefully Joe Rodriguez will come back as well, because he said he'd be waiting. And I felt a little guilty about leaving him waiting. But self-care comes first, right? Hi, Jordan. We're doing a book study here, so we're kind of reading it and then we're commenting on it. So if you guys have any questions about the houses, we're covering the 8th house right now in this book. It's written by Liz Green. She's a very renowned astrologist. So, all right, from the formulation of... Okay, so out of this collision, there comes the realization that something other than the ego runs the show. Eventually, the other is formulated into a sense of meaning and of the divine. So we move to the 9th house with its quest for the experience of God. If a person encounters fate, he begins to ask questions. That's 9th house is like religion and dogma and philosophy. From the formulation of a personal philosophy, the individual moves into the 10th house and tries to actualize his beliefs through some constructive contribution to the world around him. The 10th house is our reputation, it's our highest success, it's our most visible public persona that we develop. So the ascendant is just who we are, how we're born, sort of our acquired identity. So in sociology, they call it, it's like our inherent identity. We inherited it. But when we get to the 10th house, then we have our acquired identity, what we've built towards, what sort of we've been molded into. Okay. I think the Bible has a lot of validity as well. But anyways, so a lot of symbolism. Okay. If a person encounters fate, okay, after he has climbed his way up into the world and assumed worldly responsibilities, then he begins to question the point of it all. It begins to dawn on him that he is a part of a larger human family with its own vision and pattern of development into the future. And that's when we get into the 11th house. He becomes aware that people are not so dissimilar to each other, that the human psyche operates according to certain basic laws and patterns. That is the 11th house. Okay. Finally, even the separateness of human individuality fades in the face of the unity of the whole of life, with its past reaching back into the animal and vegetative kingdoms. Happy birthday, happy early birthday, Caleb. Hi, Brad. Okay, I think I said that right, or Brood. Okay. The matrix or sea of life is there at the bottom, the sea of the unconscious without form or definition. That's the 12th house, Pisces house, right? The sea, the fish. I think the 12th house is far more than hospitals and confinement. It is the root from which myths spring, the sea of the imagination and the most ancient past. So also a generational tie into the spiritual realm is the 12th house. Some say the age of Pisces has a lot to do with Jesus, speaking of the Bible. Happy birthday, Gracie. Okay, so we're still in Sagittarius season, so... Oh, and Caleb, you're on the cusp of Capricorn. Let's see, we're about 3-4 days out from Capricorn. If you find several planets in the 12th house in a chart, then I think the individual must learn something about the imaginal realm. If he doesn't come to terms with it, then it dismembers him. The 12th house is a medium mystic house because it contains the entire history of human experience. Now, I have my moon in the 12th. Moon is very, intuitive as well. And I definitely am not a medium, but I do feel like I channel information, whether it's coming from the spiritual realm or the collective realm. I can kind of put things together and formulate something that makes more sense than just looking at it for face value. That's how I do my readings. Some people are like disappointed when I'm not putting on a show and being like, yes, I see the light above your head. But if I see it, then you'll know I really see it, because I don't. Okay. Hi, Slavko. Okay. I think, okay, so this is, of course, similar to having strong contacts to Neptune or having a strong emphasis in Pisces. If there are many planets in the 11th house, then one must learn to work with the movements towards consciousness which are developing during one's lifetime. If there are many planets in the 8th, then the individual must learn to look darkness in the face. I think that a person can have many problems if the sun or other emphasis highlights one of these three houses. So she'll get into it again, but we're talking about these signs that had, you know, they had traditional rulers, but when they found Neptune and Pluto and Uranus, Aquarius adopted Uranus, which is the 11th house. Pisces adopted Neptune, which is the 12th house, and Pluto adopted Scorpio, which is the 8th house. So she was talking about the signs. So if you want to go back to lecture 4, part 1, it's in, again, the playlist is below. That's when we get more into the signs. Now we're going into the houses that they rule. So she's kind of segueing now from the 8th, kind of touching on the 12th, and I think we're going to go into the 11th. Just kind of a quick review. I think that a person can have many problems if the sun or other emphasis highlights one of these three houses. So the 8th, the 11th, and the 12th. If he tries to approach the crisis that life brings him from a very narrow perspective, in some way that individual is living through issues which are critical to the whole group, not just himself. That doesn't mean he shouldn't deal with the personal side of it as well. With the personal side of it, but it makes a difference if the broader perspective is understood as well. If you can't see how your own dilemma is in some way exemplary of issues which are critical for your time, then the feeling of isolation and dissociation are often overwhelming. Audience. So the audience asks her questions. What do you think is the difference in meaning between a planet and the house it naturally rules? So kind of going back to that review I just said, Liz, a planet represents a dynamic energy. It's an alive, active thing which has motivations of its own and is trying to get somewhere. A house, on the other hand, is a realm of experience, a theater. A planet is an actor, and the house is the backdrop, or the environment, I would say, against which the actor plays. If you have the sun conjuncting Neptune, then you have two actors who are wedded to each other, and the two together will represent an urge to transcend life, to touch the divine, to escape the confines of limited material reality. But if you have the sun conjuncting Saturn and they are placed in the 12th house, the two actors are not concerned with transcendence. They are going to try to build permanence and self-sufficiency and strength to cope with life. But the environment in which they must seek their goal will be the world of dreams, fantasies, inner religious longings, routes for escape back into the original womb. The actors are still going to have to eventually build a strong, solid ego, but their ground of learning will be the mystical world. The planets and their signs are the stuff of which we're made. The houses are the arenas of life in which we are destined, or fated to learn to become ourselves. Sometimes these two are horribly opposite, such as Saturn in the 12th or Neptune in the 2nd. Sometimes they are in accord, like Jupiter in the 9th or Venus in the 7th. The stuff of which you are made may not agree with the experiences life brings you, but you will be confronted with those experiences over and over again until some kind of fusion or integration begins to happen. I think that in practice, the circumstances often sound very familiar, but I believe the planets themselves are the most important factors in the chart. Thank you for the love, Slavko. Okay, audience, in your book on Saturn, so that her first book was about Saturn, and I think it was like Conquering the Devil or something is the title of it. It's not exactly that, but I know it's like the devil's in the title, because in the tarot, and I just pulled out this new tarot deck, so let's see what the devil looks like in here. Saturn rules the devil card. I don't know if I can find him really quick. That's actually, so someone said to me, you know, to be a true tarot reader, you have to have been gifted your first deck. Of course, this was many decks later and many years of coming into it. And so I thought back and I said, you know what? I was gifted my first deck. My friend's uncle, who I wouldn't think is spiritual at all, except he did drink a lot. So he may, and I'm not saying all Pisces do this, but he may have been like a Pisces or something where, yes, on one hand, he drank a lot of beers and kind of didn't want to deal with life, but had this weird spiritual side that you would never guess. But he brought out a tarot deck and like a guidebook one day, and he said, here, I'm going to do a reading for you. And then I remember there being like a lot of aces and maybe higher court cards like kings and queens. And he said, oh, you're spiritual royalty. And he gives me the deck and the book. And here, take this. And I kept it for many years, but I didn't know what to do with it. And then my first husband, my only one so far, we're divorced. He said, oh, what is this devil card in here? And it did kind of freak me out, the devil. So now that I know what it is, it's Baphomet and it's, you know, symbolism and Saturn. But at the time, I threw it out. So I don't know what that means in the grand scheme of things. But, you know, whatever you, nature abhors a vacuum. So if I was meant to have it and I threw it out, it came back to me more than tenfold. So, but it took several years for it to come to me. Here's the devil in this deck. This one looks a little more like an ayahuasca trip to me. This is the Garden of the Moon Tarot. It's pretty cool. I just got it. My cousin gifted it to me. He let me pick it out. But anyways, so hi, Amber. Wow, a lot of Sagittarius is in here. You guys love my Aries energy, huh? It's fire season. Not really. That's, you know, in August. But it is because it's Sagittarius season. Okay. So much love to my Sagittarius is out there. All right. It's funny. Let me just tell you guys a quick story. So I was like woke up and I haven't even told anyone this yet, but I woke up in bed the other morning and I had realized like a week or two ago that a friend of mine, I think like either their Instagram it's like a business Instagram, so either got disabled or they like pulled it down for now. I'm not sure what happened, but I noticed they weren't on Instagram anymore. And so for like a week, I'm going, you know, because you always wonder, is it me that they just clean house and I was irrelevant because I hadn't seen them in a long time. And so, because I moved, and so I kept thinking, I need to check on Facebook if still friends. So I wake up and I'm thinking to myself, because I'm very close to like a good friend of theirs, and so I wake up and I think, oh, I need to do that. Just out of the blue, I go to grab my phone to look if this person is still my Facebook friend, and I open the phone up and I look at my notifications because you know that kind of just catches your eye first. And for me, sometimes I could totally even space the whole thing by the time I go through the notifications. But at the very top, it was this friend's, you know, profile had liked my post, and this person, I think he does like some stuff here and there, but it was just so weird how I was like thinking like, are we still friends? Like, did he write me off? I still am in contact with one of his good friends, but I was just like, and there he was, and he liked it, and it was like my top notification when I was going to like search if he was still my friend. And he's a Sagittarius, long story short. So I'm very connected to my Sagittariuses this week. And anyways, so so the audience says, in your book on Saturn, you use planets and houses as if they were the same thing. Liz, in practice, they sound very familiar. It helps us to understand the planet, the sign, and the house if we draw comparisons. For example, knowing something about Scorpio's behavior offers a lot of insight into Pluto. And you need to grasp both to get a sense of the 8th house, right? Because Scorpio and Pluto rule the 8th house. Scorpio is the sign of the 8th house, and Pluto rules it. The same meaning underlies the trinity of sign, planet, house. But there is a difference, and I think it has to do with motivation versus fate. On some level, of course, these things are the same. But the planet shows the desire, and the house shows what is permitted. Perhaps it is superfluous to think in terms of separating them. I don't know if superfluous or if it's, well, it's not superficial, it's superfluous, right? Sometimes I read words, but I don't know if I say them right. And my guy, he definitely makes it known to me like, oh, so is that how it's said or is that how it's said? And sometimes I actually prove him wrong, but I'm a little bit of a bookworm sometimes. But anyway, perhaps it's superfluous to think in terms of separating them because Venus in the 8th house tells a very similar story to Venus in Scorpio and Venus conjunct Pluto. But I find it helpful to differentiate between them when what is experienced as one's needs and what is experienced as the arena in which those needs are confronted, challenged, and met. Audience, if there are any new planets waiting to be discovered, what will we do with them? Oh, that's a very, very intriguing question. Liz, assign them as co-rulers, I suppose, in the same way that we have assigned Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Mercury rules 2 signs, and perhaps Virgo or Gemini could do with a co-ruler. I'm sure the same applies to Venus, which rules Taurus and Libra. I'm sure we would think of something. New planets don't reverse everything we have inherited of traditional astrology. They open up a new dimension both in terms of the meaning of a sign and in terms of human experiences. We aren't the same now as we were a century ago, and certainly very different from medieval man. Our consciousness has changed, sometimes for the better, and sometimes at great cost. The newly discovered planets reflect newly discovered aspects of life. The three signs co-ruled by the outer planets have a different perceptive orientation from the other 9 signs. It's like a kind of developed peripheral vision that picks up things moving in the background that are ordinarily invisible. Audience, can you comment on John F. Kennedy's chart? I believe he had a lot of planets in the 8th house. So I told you guys, and if you watch, I think it's my first deal breaker video, Mars can conjunct Pluto can denote in a birth chart can denote somebody who might have their life taken by another. And so that's Pluto, right? So that's 8th house. So I wonder if his Mars was in his 8th house, right? So if he didn't have now if he had Mars conjunct Pluto in the 8th house, that will kind of validate that theory. So I'm really curious what she's going to say next. I haven't read this before. So I decided to read it with you guys instead of holding up. That kind of, gives it a dual purpose. So Liz says, yes, there are 5 planets in the 8th house. Mars, okay, well, there you have it. Yes, Mars was in JFK's 8th house, which is traditionally ruled by Pluto, and he was unalived by someone else. I like to call it red rum, you guys. That's kind of, I always say unalive now, but I think you can say the M word, the true crime channel. I think you can't say it when someone did it to themselves. But if I remember, I'll say red rum, which is it spelled backwards. Yes, there are 5 planets in the 8th house. Mars, Mercury, and Jupiter all conjunct in Taurus, and the Sun conjuncts Venus in Gemini. So his Venus is intercepted. Although some astrologists wouldn't say it's intercepted because Gemini does rule his 9th house as well. But anyways, we've touched on that. So anyway, so here is, if you guys want to screenshot it and follow along, here is JFK's birth chart. Okay. And you can always look it up on Astro Theme as well. The Taurus planets are all in square to Uranus in the 4th house. And the Sun-Venus conjunction squares the moon in Virgo. Apart from what... Oh, sorry. I was just like, wait, okay, he was a Gemini. Right. Apart from what that 8th house emphasizes might say about his sex life, I would interpret it as indicating a man whose fate would inevitably involve him with the collective shadow. There's all sorts of behind-the-scenes murk suggested by that lineup. Saturn and Neptune are also conjuncting in the midheaven. That suggests to me that in some way Kennedy was a collective sacrifice, right? Because Saturn would be him being in politics on the midheaven and rising to heights in it. But Neptune is sort of death as well, right? 12th house. So Neptune, 12th house, Pisces, it can be very self-sacrificial, if not just sacrificed. And we talked a little bit about that. I think it was in, I know I did the Lori Vallow synastry with her last 2 husbands, Chad and Charles. So anyways, that suggests to me that in some way Kennedy was a collective sacrifice. I am not sure that I would always interpret a full 8th house as a violent death, because I have worked with clients who have managed to carry a heavily tenanated 8th house into old age. But I would interpret a collision with the darker elements in the collective, which are of course inevitable in politics, but not everyone becomes the victim of them. So she's kind of talking like, okay, does a stellium in the 8th house mean you're going to croak, or be red rummed? No. But for me personally, as an astrologist is looking at this, I already called it Mars in the 8th house. That's kind of like she said, a planet in the house, da-da-da. It's like a Mars-Pluto conjunction. Where is his Pluto? I believe his Pluto is in the 9th house. These symbols are slightly different, but... Okay. But I would interpret a collision with the darker elements in the collective... Okay. Another interesting example of outer planet houses heavily tenanated is Salvador Dali. Dali is a raving eccentric, which is a euphemism, and he's also the mouthpiece and chief exponent for the surrealist movement in art. In his chart, the Sun conjuncts Mercury and Mars in the 11th house. Sun conjuncts, I'm just thinking about that. Sun conjuncts Mercury and Mars. Okay. While Pluto and Neptune fall in the 12th. And now, one thing I know about Pluto in the 12th, aside from like the moon in the 12th, like I have, Pluto in the 12th, whether they a lot of them won't come out as being like esoteric, or they might not end up being readers or all of that. But most people with Pluto in the 12th house, even if they're not, they'll have an interest in spirituality at the very minimum. And they may not even have any kind of real world grasp of it, because the 12th house is so elusive, but they will be quite psychic and powerful in that, and be able to really, what's it called? I was going to say tangibly, but what do they say? Like when you take a test, but can you apply it? They'll be able to really apply their psychic skills with Pluto in the 12th, but they may not even realize they're doing it. So it'll be like the type of person that's just extremely perceptive and able to really succeed, not so much by manipulating, but by being able to read people really well, but like effortlessly. And not someone who would like brag about it or even quite realize it. It might be something more that they look back on their life and go, oh, I was able to do that because I knew this and this somehow. Or people around them will go, they remember everything. They know everything about everything, every person. And anyways, so it's one that could denote a very good memory, like a strong Pluto placement, along with a certain moon placements. Or I would say Virgo and Mercury energy as well. All right. Tully is a raving eccentric, which is a euphemism, and he's also mouthpiece. Okay. In his chart, the sun conjuncts, okay, we already said that, while Pluto and Neptune fall in the 12th. Surrealism has a Neptune in the 12th too. So, I mean, if he's not, obviously an artist, but this man had a lot of psychic power with Pluto and Neptune in the 12th. And what sign is it happening in? Well, Neptune's in Cancer, on the cusp of, close to the cusp of his ascendant. Doesn't give me his exact ascendant coordinates, but, and then Pluto's in Gemini. So that Mercury energy. All right. I know I'm losing some of you here, but let's get back to it. Let's see what Liz says. Surrealism has a strong ideological basis, and when it first burst upon the creative world, it carried with it some definite ideas about the world of the dream and the unconscious, and the place of art in overturning concrete reality to open the way to the dream world. So this is his birth chart, if you guys want to screenshot that. But again, you can look it up on Astro Theme. I know there's a lot of great quotes by him. Who knows if they're accurate, but now Facebook fact checks those. Because I was trying to post a quote of, now I can't even think, the really good writer, C.S. Lewis. And it was saying, no, this isn't C.S. Lewis. And it kept kicking it, like saying it was false information. I'm like, it's just a very simple, like, inspirational quote. But I guess it wasn't C.S. Lewis that said it specifically. So, even though he has many similar quotes. All right. I'm not advertising for them. All right. Dali and most of his compatriots were very influenced by Freud. And I think the whole movement has an Aquarian stamp because of his strongly structured and almost political bias. There are innumerable other examples which I could use to illustrate the issue of heavily tenanted 8th, 11th, and 12th houses. I think you get the picture. I would say that the operative word is movement, not in the sense of motion, but a movement, a trend, or powerful current of some kind that attracts or compels the individual and eventually becomes the ground for his personal fulfillment. Movements of this kind are in no way characteristic of the other houses or signs. Some of you are asking about particular people in history. Stalin had the sun in the 12th house. I expected to find a Sun-Pluto aspect in his chart, but there is none to be seen. But there is the mediumistic sun in the 12th. I feel like the sun in the 12th isn't the most comfortable placement. I believe I met an astrologer. She's a Leo with a Virgo moon. I'm an Aries with a Virgo moon. And we really clicked and, very much on the same wavelength about astrology, and kind of knew a lot of the same things, but learned a few things from each other very quickly. And her sun was in the 12th. And I was telling her, she does like the psychic and wellness fairs and does readings there. She does solar return charts. And so I knew what that was. Like, I knew what a solar return was, but I never thought to do a chart cast with it. So, like, that's one thing I learned very quickly from her was, okay, that's another type of chart that I could run, or just I kind of understood it right away if I had seen it before I didn't absorb. But I said, you need to do a YouTube channel. You need to do a YouTube channel because she's really good. And she's just like, I don't like to be on the camera. And that's could be very much sun in the the 12th. The 12th house is the dark room. So it's more somebody who would want to be in film, maybe, but not somebody that just wants the light on them. You know, it's like, especially like the sun in the 8th or the 12th, they may not be the most comfortable with the spotlight on them. Anyways, but they especially 12th still very much care about everything in their environment, but they don't want the glory for it necessarily. And depending, I mean, if it's happening in Leo, then it could be a little bit different, but, and you know, depending on the aspects, of course, and everything. But anyways, uh, perhaps he was a medium for something at work in the collective body of Russia, just as Hitler was a medium for Germany. Perhaps his 12th house sun says something about a violent catharsis that needed to occur in the nation. Someone asked about Edgar Cayce, who was a literal medium. He had Mercury, Saturn, and Venus lined up in the 8th house. Someone also asked about Gandhi, who was another 12th house sun and another medium for his collective. We could go on like this for hours with famous people's charts. So generally, I think that if you have psychic placements, you're most likely going to see planets. Like if somebody is a true medium or psychic, you're most likely going to see planets on the IC, like the 4th house, which is Cancer's house, the water houses, the 8th house, which is Scorpio's house, and the 12th house, which is Pisces' house. Or they're going to have, you know, very strong Scorpio, Pisces, Cancerian placements as well. So that's that. All right, and that's kind of what she's touching on there. Saying like, you know, switching back to the 8th house. Audience, I think it's interesting how the outer planets at the moment are passing through signs which are more collectively oriented toward the latter part of the zodiac. And this was in 1980 again, mind you, but Liz says, yes, I think it's interesting too. The rest of the century will see them grouped in Sagittarius and Capricorn, with Pluto in Scorpio. I suppose, so this was, you know, 1980. So through the late 1980s, we had Pluto in Scorpio. So anyone born around that time has that. I suppose one way of reading that would be to say that the major changes they are likely to precipitate concern collective institutions and mores, such as the legal system, religious movements, the monetary system, and so on, right? And if you think about it, what kind of generation came up with the transition from cash to cards? You know what I mean? It's kind of those 80s babies were the first group that grew up with, you know, both. You know, I mean, they had credit cards, but really, when did that come about? I know by like the time I was working and making money in like the early 2000s, you know, that's when cards were becoming more prevalent. But when was the first credit card? Now I'm curious. I don't have my iPad right here today, you guys, but if any of you want to look it up for me really quick, like when did we first actually start having credit cards? It had to have been like, you know, after computers became commercially available. So probably it had to be the late 80s or early 90s, right? I don't know. Let me know. All right. So, you know, if none of you say anything, I'll follow up tomorrow and I'll do it at the beginning of the reading. I'll be like, so this is when credit cards were, because I always, you know, if I find, I don't always have time to review these now because I've been doing them more and more, but if I find an error, usually I correct it in the next video. Like I said this and I meant, like I was just, it showed me top videos of the year and I was kind of just reviewing the beginning of the Brad Pitt Sinistry video and I said Brad Pitt and Angelina when I meant to say Sandra Bullock one of the times. But anyway, um, all right, audience, can you comment on what happens if the outer planets are retrograde in a birth chart? Now I'm going to give you guys my sort of quick take on that. My quick answer to that, and you know, I have at least Saturn. I have a few planets in retrograde, and so an astrologist that read for me before I became, you know, an actual monetary reader myself told me that, you know, this means life will start a little later for me, that a lot of my stuff won't really evolve until later. And I know I'm getting off on a tangent, but Leonardo DiCaprio, I was just watching like a video about him really quick because I just watch stuff in the background while I'm working during the day. And you know the whole thing about how he dates women until they're 25? I need to look a little deeper into that. Maybe, I mean, it was listing all the people he's dated on there because I wouldn't know. So maybe I should go look at all their synastry as well. But um, he has Saturn square Sun, and I have our Saturn trine Sun, and I have that as well. And I've mentioned this before, but don't lose me here, or the thing about it is, when I read it, the definition, it said that they will be late bloomers or that will grow up as ugly ducklings. Now, like Leonardo and I both have Libra rising, so I don't know if we've ever been ugly ducklings per se, but I know for me, it's like I either look good or I look horrible. Like we went and got Costco cards on Black Friday, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, it's like the worst picture I've ever seen in my life. This hard shadow right here with this line, and I'm going, and so I feel like Saturn, even though it's a trine from that definition I read, there's something to it. So I wonder almost, even though it's a harmonious thing for him, and it could be something else in the chart, but I was thinking about it today, it might actually be his Saturn trine sun that makes him date these young women, because Saturn is longevity and commitment. And they were saying that his spokespeople have commented and said the reason that he does this is because he doesn't ever want to get married and have kids. And around when the women turn 25, that's when, that starts to become a desire for them. And in a way, it wasn't saying this, he sort of lets them off the leash to go find that for themselves because he's not going to provide it for them. But it's like the sun is so much about fun, right? It rules the fifth house of Leo, the house of performing arts, creativity, fun. So if you think about it, you would think it'd be like sun square Saturn, and he'd have like this hard time with it and not be able to, find a mature woman. But with Saturn trine sun, it's almost like he just thoroughly enjoys youth of the sun, and he's not gonna. His Saturn's like telling him, you don't have to commit to anyone, and he probably feels perfectly secure in that. Saturn is security, so it's funny sometimes how trines and things that are positive don't always play out the way that we think that they would if they were in a good aspect, right? You'd think Sun trine Saturn would mean that you're gonna have, a very secure identity. Well, that's the truth, but depending how it's aspecting Venus and your seventh house and all that, it doesn't necessarily equate to you wanting to have any kind of partnership, right? If your sun is very strong and supported by Saturn, you might be able to be very independent and not need, a long-term partnership or commitment. So that was just sort of my take on it today, a new take on it. I know I've touched on it a few times. It's one I do meditate on a bit, or one that, I don't know, I probably could write a whole chapter on Sun trine Saturn for some reason. Anyways, can you comment on what happens if the outer planets retrograde? All right, so she says, so her comment, Liz's comment on if the outer planets are retrograde, and she considers Saturn to be a mid planet, actually, which I don't. I consider him to be outer planet, but I think any retrograde planet tends to interiorize the expression of the planet. It operates on a more subjective and covert level. The meaning of the planet doesn't change, but its capacity for extroverted expression is altered. Retrograde planets have a very hard time telling you about themselves. For example, a retrograde Venus is just as oriented towards relationship, but it's very often a relationship with an idealized inner image of the person. And the actual partner often doesn't know very much about what is really going on. If Uranus is working on a more introverted level, it will express through active changes and separations in life, right? Uranus can just, that's that on and off. Like if you have that in the synastry, Mars square Uranus or Venus square Uranus, it's just that on and off, hot and cold. One day you're happily ever after with someone, and the next day they're gone, so Uranus could do that in the individual. Let's see, inner image of the person. If Uranus is working separations in life, so they could just suddenly, if you have a Uranus retrograde, you could just suddenly end things, or things could suddenly end for you, and you're like, I thought that was going to last a lifetime, But if you interiorize it, then it will begin to revolutionize one's thinking, and one's world of ideas may be very full of anarchistic or eccentric or advanced themes, but one's outer life may remain very conventional and staid. I think solid would be a word there, like a synonym. But okay, I guess she's not saying if it's retrograde, you would have separations. Maybe if it's afflicted. But she's saying once it's retrograde, then you internalize it, and it does, makes you very unconventional thinking, yet you may live a very conventional life. So there may be quite a juxtaposition there between your inner world with a retrograde Uranus and your outer world and what you actually practice and live. When Neptune exteriorizes itself, it will often make sacrifices for others. So like if you have a regular Neptune, but if your Neptune is retrograde, if it interiorizes, then the issue of an inner mystical devotion and offering up of self becomes more important than loving gestures to the outside world. Pluto will seek power and change in the outer world, but if you introvert it, it then becomes, or retrograde it, right? It then becomes obsessive about altering the inner world. I would hesitate to say whether either of these is preferable. Nor do I think a couple of retrograde planets make a person introverted in Jung's sense of the word, but the planet itself works more on an interior level if it's retrograde, more in the psyche or your thoughts rather than being projected onto the world audience or being pushed on you from the world. It may be more self-inflicted, whatever you're dealing with. Thank you guys for the likes. I really appreciate it. Probably gonna wrap it up here. Let's see how long this paragraph is after this next audience question. But do be sure this December to check out moonmatch.love if you're still single. Do the entry for the database. It's 50% off for the rest of the year if you haven't submitted yet. There are plenty of matches in there for you. You can look right away. You can message them. They'll get an email. You can start chatting. We just upgraded the Android app, so you can download that as well if you want. But the mobile browser or, desktop browser works just as well. And there's a lot coming with that in the coming year or two. A lot of innovations with it, especially with Pluto moving into Aquarius. All right. But anyways, so audience says, which house system are you? Oh, and if you're watching this after December of 2024, you can use coupon code rotation 411 anytime to get 10% off. All right. Audience, which house system are you using with these example charts? Liz, they are all drawn up for Placidus house cusps. I prefer the quadrant. Okay, hold up. So one thing I was thinking when we were reading through here, I can't wait until she gets into interceptions if she does, because we've talked about orbs. We've talked about, we were just talking about retrograde planets. So I'm really excited to see if she gets into, um, what did I just say? Interceptions. All right. But now we are going into the house system. So one astrologist I watched, she had some great views on the North Node return in Aries, which was happening for me in the past year or so. But he's like, we always use equal house system. Uh, I did a video on that and it got muted out because when I get phone calls, actually I forgot to put it on do not disturb. Let me see if I can do this real quick. See here. So I might get interrupted. Let's see. There we go. Oh, I was able to do it. Cool. All right. Yeah. Because when I get a phone call, even if I push it out, it will mute me. So I had done this whole video. It was about something else, but it ended up being a video about Equal House versus Placidus House. And yeah, that went out the window. But maybe I'll touch on a little here. But I do have to get out of here pretty soon, you guys. I already got dinner all prepped today, so that was good. But I got to do a couple things before my man gets home. And then, of course, it's all about him after that. But anyways. Well, me too. It's about me too. But anyway, they're all drawn up for Placidus house. They're all drawn up for Placidus house cusps. I prefer the quadrant systems to equal house because in the quadrant systems, the axis of the MC and IC are the cusps of the 10th and 4th houses and are emphasized in that way. The equal house system can give you something completely different on the cusp of the 10th and 4th, and the MC and IC float loose and seem to be unimportant. And I feel they are terribly important because they tell you a great deal about family inheritance and about the parents. As the 10th and 4th are the parental houses, it seems to me absurd to separate them from the midheaven axis. And what I don't like about the house system, really quick, before I start the next paragraph in this, is yes, it changes the actual house rulers. And the problem with that is that for me, the Placidus is the actual snapshot of the sky when you were born. You know, how much of Scorpio was visible and all of that. You know, that it's like an actual snapshot. So when you go to equal house system, you're just rounding and making remember I did this spiel, but there's 12 signs in a chart. So there's 360 degrees in a circle. So each sign has 30 degrees. So in an equal house system, it's making each sign have 30 degrees from your ascendant. So if I'm 0 degrees Libra, now every house is going to have a perfect 30 degrees in it. And that's not the way my chart is. I almost don't have any Taurus and Sagittarius. I do, but they don't rule any house. So that makes a very different chart because for a lot of Libra risings, they might have a Sagittarius IC. I have a Capricorn IC. So a lot of them have Capricorn ICs too, but like she's saying, that IC makes a big difference because somebody with like for example, Courtney Love has a Libra rising, and so she's a little less common. She has her IC in Aquarius and her midheaven in Leo. So somebody who has an Aquarian family or childhood is going to be much more a creative childhood, a very eccentric, different kind of childhood, where Capricorn I see is a very strict, you need to work hard kind of childhood. So it's a very different type of upbringing. And then Leo midheaven denotes a lot of attention and fame, whether deserved or not. And I'm not making a comment on her, where a Cancer midheaven is sort of like more relational, where the world is your family, and you make families wherever you go. So, anyways, or you're generally welcomed into other family units very easily. All right. So where Leo midheaven's going to be like very creative, very like look at, everybody, I she's in a band and it blew up, So anyway, all right. Now I'm just getting lost here, but this problem of house division is of course a long-standing problem, as with all other problems of this kind in astrology. I think you must work with various systems and choose the one which you feel works best for you. One sec. Had to clear my throat there. My orientation is much more psychological than that of many astrologers, and I always pay careful attention to the family background. Perhaps that's not so relevant for other approaches to a chart. So an equal house chart might work on another level. But for me, the keynote of the 10th house is the world. Mother is our first physical world before we discover the bigger one outside. Mother is the IC, which is the lower part. And the attitudes towards one shape the attitudes towards the other. Saturn, as the natural ruler of the 10th, or the MC, the midheaven, is called the Lord of the world. And in Kabbalism, it is the Great Mother. That's very interesting, right? Because generally Saturn is the midheaven represents the father, right? But it also goes back to the mother, right? Because everything is a spectrum. So, the axis of the IC to the MC, it represents the mother generally, the IC, and the father, the MC, the top of the chart, but it's interchangeable, right? So some people don't have a father, so the mother takes the role of both and informs both of those angles, or was destined to, right? Okay. I've been saying right a lot today. Right. Okay. So let's see, back to what she's saying. The midheaven is the cusp of the 10th house in quadrant system, and is the point of inheritance from the mother, as well as the obligations to the world. I think you must simply do your charts by both systems for a while, if you have questions about this. Some people always do both, but I have abandoned using equal house because I'm not very happy with the information it reveals in the terms of psychology of the individual. I think you must also watch the progressions and transits in your own chart to see, say, when something goes over a planet that might be either in the 10th or the 9th or the 11th, to see what sphere of life is affected. That way you can gather your own evidence. I would be very hesitant to say that equal house is invalid and Placidus the only proper house system, but for my purpose, I prefer Placidus, right? So I never even looked at equal house until that one astrologer about the North Node video, and his channel was kind of small too, like mine, like growing. So I was like, wait, and I went, because I have the software, so I'm like, okay, let's click the equal house button, and I immediately looked at it and went, no, this is not for me. But he said that's all we do. So, and he did seem to really know what he was talking about, at least when it came to the nodes. So I do feel that it does work for him. So no judgment. I just know that if I tried to take a client right now using it, I would probably be pretty far off in my interpretations of them. And they'd be, oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about. But sorry, I was just trying the equal house system real quick. So it's not worth my time or effort. But anyway, audience. So let's see here. I'm probably going to have to skip out, you guys, because like I said, I got to get a couple things done before 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. This was a good little run for today. So we will resume with Lecture 4, Part 3 tomorrow. I will definitely be able to get on. I don't know exactly what time, though. It'll probably be between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I do want to pick up. Tomorrow's pretty wide open. So this is pretty long, Lecture 4 here. Might take us a few. I know it took 5 parts to get through Lecture 3, but we're only on Part 2, actually, of Lecture 4, so we may be able to get it done in like 4 parts. So if you want to check out the first part of Lecture 4 or the first 3 lectures from the book, the outer planets and their cycles. The playlist is in the description below, and when I get around to it, I'll pin it in the comments. Again, be sure to enter divinetimingdatabase.com. You can get their moonmatch.love, 50% off to enter and to see if you have any matches. So, it's, I mean, if you're single and you've been, waiting your whole life for the right one, and especially if you're dating online, there's no reason not to get into moonmatch.love. All right, I'm sending you guys lots of love and light as always, and I will see you all tomorrow.